My name's Lefty, born and raised just north of Boston, Massachusetts. I was a bookie for a lot of years. I've been to prison a couple times. I'm going to tell you my story, which my story might seem unique to some, but I've come to find out that I share a very similar background to others who have worked in sports betting for the majority of their lives, but also others who grew up in my area around the time I did. Growing up where I did, it was normal to have a bookie. My father had them, my friends' fathers and older brothers had them. What a point spread was, or a money line, or total, isn't something I was like sat down and taught. It was just something I knew at a young age. And I don't like using this word to describe my father's betting, but because he's no longer alive and won't see this, he was what I would call, or some people would call, like a sucker or a square. But even suckers win sometimes, and those are the only times he let me see a difference in him. I know he lost a lot, but I didn't know it at the time. It wasn't until I was older and my parents got divorced and I found out stories through my mother. My father was very influential on me and the direction I ultimately took working in sports betting. I'll never forget one day pulling up to his bookie's house with him. This long, perfectly paved black driveway, really nice house, but he had an adjustable hoop with like a plexiglass backboard and breakaway rim. I'd hop out the car, grab the ball, and dunk while they went inside. One day while leaving there, I heard the bookie say to my father, "Stevie, in the end, the bookies always win." I didn't know what a bookie was at that point exactly. I might have been like 9, maybe 10, but I wanted to be a bookie. In middle school, I was always the kid running March Madness pools or any contest tournament in class. Instead of doing schoolwork, I was always creating pools or grading contest scores. For some reason, I was always really good at like drawing out bracket-style tournaments on paper. I was usually the commissioner in fantasy leagues and would carry the sports section of the newspaper around with me in school instead of books. We had a pool table and a ping pong table growing up. I got really good at pool. One 4th of July on a cookout, my father bet on me in a match against one of his friends, and I won. And I'll never forget how proud he was of me and the look on this guy's face when, you know, he lost to a kid who didn't even have hair on his balls. I was really into golf. I have videos of me hitting golf balls at like 4 or 5 years old. Played a lot of local junior tournaments. I never practiced or took it serious because golf wasn't like a cool sport that girls liked, you know, when I was growing up anyway. My junior golf career highlight would be in one of the New England's like biggest tournaments. It's called the Junior Rogers. I had my best friend caddying for me. We didn't sleep the night before 7 a.m. tea time. I shot a 51 on the front 9, but a 3 under 33 on the back. I finished outside the top 25, but that big green 33 stood out on the giant tournament scoreboard in the clubhouse. It was by far the lowest 9-hole score of the tournament. And, you know, golfing always meant gambling, and I didn't even realize some people didn't gamble on golf until I got older and started playing with different people outside of my father or close friends. I was always my father's partner in golf matches versus friends. You know, now I played football and baseball growing up, but I never experienced more pressure than some of those golf matches with my father. I didn't know it at the time really, but because I was like 13 or 15 or whatever age I was, he would be getting a half a shot on some of the longer holes. So over an 18-hole match, we would be getting like 2 or 3 shots. At least if it was like the first time playing against someone. His friends that knew me already or had played with me before wouldn't give him shots for me because they knew I was good. This was another thing that kind of molded my perception. You know, my old man would do this to his friends, which was something I always questioned in my mind when I got much older, especially when, you know, collecting money from friends, you know, friends who had serious girlfriends or eventually wives. They always hated me because how could I be their friend when I'm taking all their money? But I mean, I genuinely enjoyed paying my friends when they won, and I told a story about how one of my friends won $17,000 one week. He was actually crying when I paid him. He hit like a bunch of bird cages one week. But I talked about how when I paid him, he went and bought a ring for his now wife, but he lost $8,000 2 weeks later after that, and he couldn't pay. In my mind, that was like unacceptable. I ended up getting the money, but our friendship was pretty much over after that. I'll try to link that story somewhere, or at least post a screenshot because it's a good one. My father would always let me put one NFL and one college football bet in each week. He was always calling in bets, and this is before the cell phone era. We'd stop, and he'd use a payphone. I'd always get the newspaper and copy all the lines for the games, and I'd copy the rundown of lines that my father's bookie had. I remember I would like crumble up the sheet and start over if there were any mistakes or scribbles or errors. I always wanted what I called like a nice clean sheet or like a nice neat sheet. I don't ever really remember having to pay when I lost, but when I won it was a new hat, sneakers, baseball bats or whatever I was into at that time. So there was a strong association at a young age between picking the correct outcomes of games and happy memories. But as I got older, I was very conscious, almost fearful of being the mark or a square like my father was. I was obsessed with trying to solve sports betting. I knew there were people who were successful with betting sports. I didn't know anyone that was, but I knew it was possible. I was a member of all the old sports betting forums, the RX, the SBR, and when I was like 16 years old, I became a member of a website called Frank777.com. It was owned by Frank Lefty Rosenthol with the help of his son-in-law. You had to be 18 years old to join. You could pay to be a member, and it had different levels like bronze, silver, and gold. Or if you were a member long enough or logged many hours, you could submit an essay on why you wanted to be a member. I lied about my age. I eventually was a gold member. The site was awesome. It had all types of cool information, stories, and terminology definitions like Apple, Action Jackson, Michigan Bankroll, or Dummy Up, things I had never heard before. He even posted like personal family photos. For those of you that don't know, Frank Rosenthal was portrayed by Robert De Niro in the classic movie Casino. He's definitely on my Mount Rushmore of sports bettors. I recently moved and found this old box that was filled with notebooks and pads of paper. I would take notes on literally everything. I was looking through some of them and was shocked. I was doing this up until around 2011 because I had a whole notepad on NBA rookie scouting reports, and it was the 2010 class with John Wall and Paul George, and that must have been when I actually ended up switching over to computers. Now, it was around maybe my junior or senior year in high school when I got my own bookie. Whenever I'd called to place bets with my bookie, it always involved putting bets in for my friends too, which this helped because instead of me calling in like a $20 bet for myself, it'd be 50 or 100 combined with my friends' bets. Obviously, the next natural transition was starting to think, what if I didn't call in my friends' bets? They never win. And that phrase, Stevie, in the end, the bookies always win, was always in my head. I was already at the point where I had like 5 or 6 friends giving me bets to place, and sometimes if they'd be on like the opposite side of each other, if it was on a straight bet or conflicting teams in a parlay, I'd just cancel the 2 bets out. And I noticed doing this was covering a good part of my losses each week. Eventually, I did become an agent for the bookie I was betting through. I think my first deal was something like 10% with a red figure or makeup. It was pretty bad, but I didn't have anything to compare it to. But eventually went on to get a better split, and down the road started my own operation. I did a series of videos recently called Story Time, where I tell a few stories about my life as a bookie, specific ones collecting money, or just how the operation worked in general. I also ran card games for a couple of years. Some of you might not remember this time, but because it was like 20 years ago. But some random regular guy named Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker, and this caused a huge poker boom. Everyone and their mothers wanted to play poker, and if you already knew how to play poker, specifically Texas Hold'em, you didn't even have to be that good. You could just go online and find people that were playing for money that didn't even really know how to play. They were like learning how to play while playing for money. And I'm not exaggerating either. A lot of people got rich during this time. And I think poker players call it like the golden era, at least the poker boom. And this was pivotal, in my life because it showed my mother that money could be made from gambling. I didn't have to try and win my father over, but as a young man in his early 20s who never had a real job and was a bookie, I wasn't exactly the kid in my family my parents were bragging to their friends about. But the poker stuff definitely changed that a little bit. I won a tournament on, I don't remember the exact site. It was either the old Intertop Sportsbook that had a poker part of it, which is now called Every Game, or it was possibly Paradise Poker. I don't know. I made the final table of a big $5 tournament that had rebuys and add-ons at breaks. The tournament lasted a full 24 hours. I was the chip leader when it broke down to the final table, but I ended up coming in like 6th. Lost with pocket kings to trip jacks. I'll never forget that. I think I won like, I don't know, 4,800, maybe 5K. I didn't even have a bank account at this point. They mailed me a check and I signed it over to my mother, who had just days prior found out she had to pay like $5,000 in taxes and was crying when I gave her that check. At this point, she had had enough of my father's bullshit and was divorced from him. But to give you an idea of how accepted this lifestyle I was living was with my parents, I would run poker games in her basement. I'd be the dealer. I'd rake $1 for every $10 in the pot. So $20 pots, I'd take $2. I'd take a percentage of that went over $20. I'd also lend out money to players at 7 points, but in reality, I was basically just lending out the money I was raking from the pots. I had a good little thing going. Every Wednesday night, my mother would make food, put out sodas and snacks for the players. word ended up traveling, got around about the games, and then I started a Monday night game for an older crowd, like my older brothers, people his age. This was kind of like the executive game. They were older and had more money, but my brother doesn't know this, and I never told him, but I probably cost him a lot of money in his poker life because I was a dealer. I'd sometimes deal an ace to him off the bottom. I wouldn't deal him pocket aces, but like, I don't know, every 8 or 10 hands, I try to get him at least a premium card. And it's amazing how many times per session he'd end up getting pocket aces because I was making sure he got at least one ace. And if anyone at the table understood probability, they would have known something was up because, the probability of getting pocket aces one time over, let's say, an hour session or, I don't know, 30 hands is probably like 10% maybe. I'd say he was getting them maybe 2 or 3 times. I know that's not ethical and it's flat out cheating and wrong. I guess my excuse would be is I was young, but the truth is I was an overall bad person in my 20s, if I'm being completely honest. And the reason I say I cost my brother money is, in the long run, is he didn't know I was manipulating the deck to give him an edge, and he thought he was good at poker. He would go on to lose a lot of money playing poker in games when I wasn't a dealer. And as far as cards go, I had a phase where I became obsessed with card counting and blackjack, which I picked up fairly quickly. And I don't just mean like the standard high-low count either, but I was pretty good at keeping side counts and could keep up with the Omega systems. I didn't really have the patience that's required for it as much as I probably would now as I'm older. I'll never forget my first real attempt at card counting in Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. One of my very first sessions, the true count got up in the high teens almost immediately, and I quickly learned you need to be deep and well-funded to withstand the variance. I lost maybe 4K, all with a true count in the double digits. I had some really good trips too, but maybe the best one wasn't even really from card counting, but hole carding. It was like 3 a.m. at Mohegan Sun. I think I was there for like a bachelor party. I don't know, I can't remember, but I always sit at third base at blackjack tables, and this older gentleman dealer was like peeling the edge of the hole card from the shoe rather than like palming it and sliding it flat. I've never seen a dealer do this. I wasn't able to see the entire hole card, but enough to tell if it was a face card or not. I wanted to ask him like what days and hours he worked. I didn't. I always looked for him every time I was there, and I did eventually find him again, but he was dealing completely different. And part of me thought he was like doing it on purpose, but not sure why he would do that. Overall, my 20s were great. I was way more financially secure than I am even now. I was also a lot more irresponsible and thought the flow of money would never end. I'd be at a house party on, say, a Thursday night, and I'd just book flights to LA or Vegas for me and a couple buddies for the next day. We'd fly there with no luggage and just go shopping. Not saying that was like a regular thing, but that definitely happened more than a couple times. I have a lot of regrets about money wasted, but I do have a ton of good memories and stories with friends that I'm still very close with today. About the only good thing I did with money was I gave a lot of it to family, but even that's embarrassing thinking the things I did looking back as like an older guy now. I'd bring envelopes of cash to holidays and give them to my family. My sister, we're like 11 months apart, and I have 2 older brothers. I don't regret giving them money, but how I went about it was just so tacky. It was not like out of the goodness of my heart. It was to like flex, basically. Like, hey, look at me, I'm doing so good. My mother would clean my apartment. I'd give her $1,000. My sister moved into a new apartment. I'd furnish it. Those are things I'm happy I did, but 90% of what I did was just stupid. Over-tipping everywhere I went, buying people drinks at bars, running up to huge tabs, just trying to be like a big shot, I guess. As the saying goes about money, easy come, easy go. At the peak of my sportsbook operation, I probably had like 100 daily active players betting directly into me, but I also had several agents at different area colleges and neighboring cities. I treated being a bookie very seriously and treated it like a business and ran it very efficiently. I eventually caught the attention of a big sportsbook operation, and they recruited me. It was run by 2 guys, both named Mike. They were like semi-old school type of guys, and I wasn't just booking for them, but I was also betting into them under a bunch of different ghost accounts or like fake names, and betting through some of the agents they had as well. I'd like to think around this time I was a profitable sports bettor, but I didn't have a legit edge or anything. I was like taking advantage of certain angles or leaks within different sportsbook operations. I had a bunch of different bookies I bet through. Some were old school pen and paper bookies that refused to transition to online PPH services, and those are my favorite. When technology started to change, I was using that to my advantage a lot. I was really big into like arbing, scalping, and middling. I had a couple online accounts, Bodog and Intertops are the first 2 I had, but I had a dozen or so more different bookies like all around Massachusetts. I'd try and middle MLB totals around key numbers or You know, one of my favorite things was I'd book a lot of phone bets on the home teams, Patriots and Celtics, at an off-market inflated number, and then I'd lay it off at a number 2 points better, and then I'd have like a bingo shot if it landed in the middle. And I'll never forget Eddie House, Boston Celtics, maybe 2008, I don't really remember. Random weekday night, he hit a meaningless foul line jumper at the end of the game to win by 9 points. I had booked maybe 3 or 4 thousand in bets on the Celtics at -9.5, and I had bet them for 3 or 4K at -8. That was a really good one, and you know, all the sayings about greed are true. I met a guy around my age named Shane. He has since passed away, unfortunately, but he worked in the financial district in Boston. His father was filthy rich. They traveled all the time for business. Shane's job was to take clients or potential clients out partying or golfing and, you know, butter them up. A lot of these guys were heavy into hard drugs. Back in the day, a lot of bookies were like one-stop shops for everything. Tickets to games or drugs were all on the menu. Anything I could make money off of or that would help grow my sportsbook operation, I was into, basically. You know, I was planning to meet Shane on a Tuesday morning to settle up figures, and he had placed an order for other stuff to pick up too. I'll just say the Class A kind of stuff. Mondays and Tuesdays were settle up days. Collecting and paying out players were very busy those days. I had different places I would go to meet people, but I was unaware a local task force had recently got a judge to sign off on a 9-month investigation to watch me. A friend who I've known since 5th grade got pulled over leaving my house one day, and he had drugs on him. Crazy part is he didn't even get them from me, and it wasn't even a lot that he had too. I honestly, in my mind, wasn't even a drug dealer. I was, of course, by definition, and I definitely looked like one to the detectives watching me. I was meeting people all day. They would stop people that left my house, but they wouldn't find any drugs on them. They even stopped a food delivery driver, pulled him over. In my paperwork it says, a man walks up to my porch, hands me a big brown bag, and I hand him money. They thought that was like my daily re-up. It was actually just subs I ordered. Eventually they did get lucky and they pulled a kid over, and him and his girlfriend told them who they got it from. That was enough for them to get a warrant for me and my place. And when I say 15 plainclothes detectives surrounded the apartment building my uncle owned, I'm not exaggerating. They knocked on the back door. I tried running out the front, and they had me dead to rights. They fucked me up pretty good for trying to run. They cracked and broke a rib of mine. Cracked or broke a rib, I don't know, slamming me into a car. Probably had a police brutality case on my hands, but they searched the apartment. They found Shane's order I had for him that he was supposed to pick up the next day. I had it in a closet right next to a scale. And to make it even easier for them, I had some utility bills and credit cards in my name in the general vicinity of the drugs. Detectives asked me if I wanted to go home and sleep in my own bed that night, and all I had to do was tell them where I got the drugs from. If not, I'm going away for a long time, and they would also charge my uncle as well because he owned the building they found the stuff in. At the time, I didn't know that 2 people had cooperated against me, which led to this arrest. It wasn't until I had the paperwork I found that all out. Now, the decision to not cooperate and tell wasn't made out of like fear or potential retaliation. I wasn't in a gang or didn't take some oath of silence, but it's more about principles and like morals. You know, being a tattletale is bad. I knew that at a young age. How could I get caught for something and tell on someone else to avoid my punishment? It wasn't even an option in my mind. And, you know, a lot of people say they'll never rat, or including my friend Ryan, who told on me. But until you're put in that situation, you don't really know. And the solution to this is very simple. If you don't think you can take the punishment that comes with whatever law you're breaking, then don't break that law. I mean, don't break any laws in general, but definitely not the ones that'll carry time you can't do. The one thing on my side is this was my very first arrest, and criminal record plays a big role in how hard the judge and DA go at you, but it was a serious enough offense to where I wasn't going to avoid jail time. They stacked up a bunch of shitty charges just to make sure something sticks, like all felony charges, using an electronic device to facilitate a crime, I should say, drug paraphernalia, what else? Distribution in a school zone. There was a school 2 streets over from me, and technically the city I lived in, no matter where you were, it was technically a school zone. But in the end, it was just the one felony, possession with intent to distribute. I got a lawyer. Under his advice, he said, don't even bother bailing out. I was going to get time no matter what. I might as well get used to being in jail, get settled in there, and I'd be credited for the time served. And, you know, he was right, because by the time I got sentenced, I had already done 3 months. I had to do another 6 months, which in my mind at that time was, you know, kind of short, or I wasn't really sweating it. But if I was free and walked into court to get sentenced in 9 months, I'd be looking at that like a life sentence. And, you know, I'm not some like hardened convict or anything, but 9 months is nothing. I have friends who have done 15 years in federal pens. But this is a big part of my story because it ended my thriving upstart sportsbook operation. You can't just go away for almost a year and then come out and pick right back up like nothing happened. I definitely tried to. And, you know, my first time being locked up wouldn't be my last, unfortunately. You'd think after being locked up, I'd have some plan to like change my lifestyle around, but when I got out, I felt like it was just a bad beat. Like I got told on, and I didn't really get caught. They just cheated and like rigged the game. Um, and I also knew that I could do time and survive comfortably in there. I know that must sound like ridiculous, but I'm just being honest about like my thought process at this time when I first got out. So I'm right back with the mics. I won't tell the detailed version of how I made a bunch of money post betting, but I did tell that story a while ago to my Discord community, and I actually just recently reposted that story on my socials if you want to check that out. I was very impatient and wanted to make up for lost time. But it was much tougher to build up clientele for my sportsbook. I was basically out of the picture for a full year, so people had moved on. And it seemed like everyone was a bookie now. With PPH services, it made it so easy anyone could book. But I did have experience, and upper management within the sportsbook operation gave me more responsibility, and I did a lot of like onboarding new agents. I was basically teaching the back-end software to the older guys who were now being like forced to go online. At this time, I met a lot of good people during this time. Learned a lot about how like sharp bettors actually operate. I was working a lot directly with the actual PPH companies located offshore too, like personalizing books and having them add different features. This is around the time I started doing a lot of things I still do today, like wrangling accounts or just swapping accounts for different bettors. I still have my sports book, but it was just much smaller, and it was basically I could run it with my eyes closed. PPH services had it so running a book was like autopilot. I was spending more time in the main office and was doing a lot of player profiling of potential sharp accounts. Big Mike would hand me a list of account names with master agent logins and have me look through weeks of bet history to try to find out like what players were just being lucky or sharp. I started doing this like on referral for other sports books outside of the Mike's umbrella. And this would actually help me find patterns or leaks in different sports books. If I noticed some guys exploiting a certain market by taking advantage of pricing errors or even like a software glitch, I would look into see if I could like replicate it rather than like voicing the issue and getting it fixed. In a couple cases, if I knew the player on the other end, I'd get in touch with them and tell them, hey, look, I know what you're doing. One call, this thing gets patched, or just cut me in. Keep in mind, we aren't talking about DraftKings and FanDuel here, or even these big offshore books. It's little PPH services popping up everywhere that were buried in customer service calls. I was always more attracted to the bettors side. I was always looking for bettors who were like legitimately sharp in different sports, and something I started doing, which I still do today, through different arrangements, is get access to the back end of different sports books that have sharp players betting on the book, and I look and see what they're betting. I was doing a lot of errands for the mics, meeting people and dealing with like their VIP clients they had. Both the mics at this time started spending like less and less time in the office and were less on top of things, which only opened up more avenues for me to earn. They were both like filthy rich, and they'd always say to me like, stick with us and you'll be a millionaire by the age of 30. Well, my 30th birthday, I was back in prison. I had gained a lot of attention in my city. I was known to local law enforcement. Some of these guys I went to school with, and they knew what I was into. Running around collecting money, hustling, no legit job. I was like the opposite of low-key or under the radar. One night, leaving the downtown section of the city I'm from, I was walking, and a couple friends saw me and asked, hey, do you want to ride? I didn't even live far away. I had been drinking and should have just walked, but I got in the car. And after just a couple minutes, I was being dropped off. I get out, start walking down my street, and two unmarked cars blocked the car I just got out of. The other one pulled up right next to me. I was only about 100 feet from my door. There was all types of illegal stuff in the car, but I also had a warrant in a different city I had no clue about for something small like failure to appear or like some fine. I don't even remember. So I was getting booked no matter what. I don't want to get into all the details of that case. The Discord members know all about it, and I told a lot of stories about my time locked up, but I ended up taking a plea deal, another felony charge, this time 2.5 years, but it was a split sentence. Half of it was to be served in the House of Correction. The other half was suspended time hanging over my head on probation when I got out. So when I got released, I was under strict probation, meetings with my probation officer, drug and alcohol testing, all types of stuff. They had you jumping through hoops. I had to get a real job, too. I was in my 30s and never had a real job besides working some summers for my father. All I knew was sports betting. But fortunately, I ended up landing like the perfect job for me at the time with a company called Sports Insights. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with that. It was owned and operated at the time by Dan Fabrizio. He's now one of the owners of Unabated. Sports Insights, a subscription-based sports betting information website. My job was to update player injuries, input referee and umpire assignments and test the speeds of the live odds screens to make sure the feeds or the different sports books were optimal. The office was about an hour away from where I lived, but besides the commute, it was pretty ideal. I worked by myself at nights. A couple other people on weekends worked with me. I went broke around this time betting sports. Even though I was working full time, I didn't have money coming in like I used to, and I never really changed my bet sizing. I mean, I did. I was betting a lot less per game, but it was still way more than I should have for the amount of money I had at this time. Besides money spent on court and lawyer fees while locked up, I would order the max amount allowed every week on commissary while locked up and spend a ton of money on the phone. It can get expensive. I had many extended downswings betting before this, but it wasn't really felt too much because I was making so much money. And also, maybe more importantly, is at this time when I went broke, I didn't have any angles I was exploiting. I had access to sharp information and bets, but if you're over betting, the risk of ruin is pretty much inevitable. And it wasn't the last time I'd go bust either. Around this time, there was rumblings about the Supreme Court allowing states to decide if they wanted to make sports betting legal. This was exciting because I felt like I was in a good place in an industry that was bubbling. Dan Fabrizio unfortunately ended up selling Sports Insights to what's now called Action Network. I'm sure some of you have heard this. And this was my glimpse into the direction of where sports betting was going. They would do so many things I disagreed with. They had this daily spot called the Steam Report, and it was such bullshit. They would highlight games that got steamed and talk about them as if they were like good opportunities to bet. Keep in mind, they're doing this after a game has already been steamed, so clueless bettors are betting the worst of the number that's already moved. That's just one of the many examples, but the biggest one I disagreed was just their overall business model. They basically teamed up with the sports books as affiliates and made money off bettors either signing up or losing money at sports books that they partnered with. So you got a sports betting information company that makes money from bettors losing. I left there in I think 2019 and started what I call the Betting Network, sports betting educational website where I do lessons, game previews, and do daily market reports and how to analyze the market. You know, in retrospect, I probably should have just toughed it out at Action Network and tried to use that as a way to leapfrog to another company within sports betting. States were becoming legal, and I just thought there would be tons of new bettors thirsty to learn about how betting works, like I was when I was starting. I couldn't have been more wrong. Nobody cares about learning. There are clueless people who don't know anything about sports betting selling picks and making insane amounts of money today. I'm still passionate about sports betting education, and that's like the focus of a lot of my content, but I do struggle with the idea of doing things the right way or just going like full tout and selling picks. I know that I could provide more value than 95% of the people selling picks, but I also know that it's almost impossible for a pick seller, or a pick buyer, I should say, to be profitable long term while also paying for picks. It's just simple math. The margins aren't big enough no matter how good the pick seller is. I've done way too many videos on this topic and the downsides to paying for picks, so I'm not going to get too much into that right now. But, you know, maybe because I've always looked for shortcuts or like the angle and everything that now I can't in good conscience commit it to it like fully. I do run a free Discord where I have different betting lessons on various topics with betting tools and educational content, but I did just recently create like a members-only private section within the Discord. It's primarily for like the OG long-term members who have been with me from the start, but I am starting to charge access to it to new people that join. It gives members what I call a power pack. It has my own proprietary power ratings where I price out each game and a bunch of other stuff. You can download the document. It gets updated daily. The invite link to join the free Discord is all in my social media bios. Join, DM, or comment any questions. Hope you guys found this story interesting. Not sure how long this one went, but good luck with your bets.